My name is Natalie, 33 years old and a forensic accountant by trade. I stood alone in the center of the mahogany courtroom, my hands empty, while my mother Patricia laughed from the plaintiff table. Could not afford a lawyer, she mocked loud enough for the gallery to hear. You always were the pathetic one. Her expensive attorney smirked, adjusting his silk tie. But then the judge opened the plain manila folder I had just submitted. He stared at the single sheet of paper inside. The courtroom fell dead silent. The judge looked up, his eyes locking onto my mother's attorney. Counsel, the judge said, his voice echoing. Your client will not be needing a lawyer because your client does not own anything in this room. My mother's attorney leaned over, caught a glimpse of the signature on the page, and his face turned the color of ash. My mother's knees physically buckled as she gasped, "Oh my God, you!" Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to legally cut off toxic family members who tried to destroy your life. Growing up in a wealthy Chicago suburb, my family cared about two things: appearances and money. I learned early on that I was just the background character in my younger sister Madison's perfect life. While I spent my 20s grinding through rigorous corporate audits and untangling complex financial fraud cases, Madison spent her time maxing out credit cards and marrying Terrence. Terrence is an African-American former college football player turned self-proclaimed venture capitalist. In reality, he had never successfully launched a single business in his life. He was a smooth talker who wore tailored suits and sold empty promises. But my mother worshipped the ground he walked on because he knew exactly how to flatter her ego. The real nightmare started exactly 3 weeks before that day in court. It was a crisp Saturday evening at the Oakbrook Country Club. We were gathered in the grand ballroom to celebrate Madison's 30th birthday. The room was draped in white silk, dripping with crystal chandeliers, and filled with over 200 guests from Chicago's elite business circles. Waiters circled with silver trays of champagne flutes, while a live jazz band played softly in the corner. I was sitting quietly at a back table nursing a club soda, trying to stay out of the way. I had just worked an 80-hour week at the family property management firm, balancing the chaotic books that my mother constantly mismanaged. I was thoroughly exhausted. Suddenly, the jazz music abruptly stopped. My mother, Patricia, wearing a custom designer gown that cost more than my annual rent, tapped her crystal champagne glass with a silver spoon. The massive room quieted down. She smiled radiantly at the wealthy crowd, soaking in their attention, then her eyes locked onto me. The manufactured warmth in her gaze vanished immediately, replaced by a cold and calculated glare. She stepped off the raised stage and walked straight toward my table. The crowd parted for her like the Red Sea. Madison and Terrence followed close behind her, both wearing identical arrogant smirks. Patricia stopped right in front of me. She did not bother to lower her voice. In fact, she spoke loudly enough for the surrounding tables to hear every single humiliating word. "Natalie," she announced, holding out 2 crisp white envelopes. "I have decided to make some restructuring changes to the family business. Your services as our lead accountant are no longer required. Here is your formal termination letter." I froze in my seat. The polite clinking of glasses around us completely stopped. Hundreds of people were staring at me. "Mom, what are you talking about?" I asked quietly, trying my hardest not to cause a scene in front of her friends. "I manage the entire payroll and federal tax compliance. You cannot just fire me in the middle of a birthday party." She carelessly dropped the first thick envelope onto my lap. "Oh, it is already done. And there is one more thing." She dropped the second envelope right on top of the first. "That is a 30-day eviction notice for your apartment. I am selling the building." My heart slammed violently against my ribs. The apartment I lived in was technically owned by the family firm. I had paid rent on time every single month, for 5 years out of the mediocre salary she paid me to do the work of 3 people. "You are evicting me?" I asked, my voice trembling slightly, despite my absolute best efforts to keep it steady. "Where am I supposed to go on such short notice?" Madison stepped forward, crossing her arms tightly over her sparkling sequined dress. Do not be so dramatic, Natalie. You can find a cheap studio somewhere in the suburbs. We need to liquidate that building immediately to free up some capital. Terrence has a massive new crypto real estate startup, and Mom is investing $500,000 into his seed round. We cannot have your cheap rent holding back our family progress. I looked up at Terrence. He was grinning widely, adjusting the heavy gold watch on his wrist. A watch I knew for a fact was purchased last week with company funds I had flagged in the system. Terrence leaned in, placing a heavy, patronizing hand on my shoulder. Take one for the team, Nat. You always were the boring numbers girl anyway. It is time for the real players to make some real money. Go pack your boxes and let us celebrate. My mother sighed heavily, waving her manicured hand dismissively as if I were a filthy pest. Do not ruin your sister's birthday with your typical victim mentality. Just take your things and leave quietly. You are embarrassing yourself in front of my guests. I sat there for a long moment, the two envelopes resting heavy on my lap. 200 pairs of judgmental eyes were burning into my skin. The public humiliation was carefully designed to break me. Patricia wanted me to cry, to beg to make a fool of myself, so she could prove to her country club friends that I was the unstable, jealous older sister. But I am a forensic accountant. My entire career is built on staying completely detached and analyzing raw data. And the data right in front of me told a very clear and dangerous story. My mother was stealing from her own company to fund a massive scam. I stood up smoothly. I did not shed a single tear. I picked up the envelopes, gave my mother a polite, chilling smile, and walked out of the ballroom with my head held high. I did not go home to cry into my pillow. I drove straight to the family office building downtown. I keyed into the secure server room, plugged in my encrypted hard drive, and began downloading 10 years of corporate financial records. If they wanted to kick me out into the cold streets, I was going to make sure I took all the receipts with me. And what I found hidden deep within those digital files would guarantee that none of them would ever sleep peacefully again. The cold blue light of the server room illuminated my face as the transfer bar slowly filled across my laptop screen. I sat on the hard linoleum floor, listening to the hum of the cooling fans, and opened the master ledger for the family firm. My mother had always treated the company accounts like her personal piggy bank, but what I saw staring back at me was not just careless spending, it was financial suicide. The $500,000 she mentioned at the party was not a future investment. It was already gone. A wire transfer had been executed 3 days ago, routed through a shell company registered in Delaware and dumped straight into an unregulated offshore cryptocurrency exchange. I clicked on the authorization signature. It was Patricia. She had bypassed my department entirely to push this through. Staring at the screen, I felt a sick knot form in my stomach as I remembered the agonizing board meeting we had just last Tuesday. That was the day Terrence officially pitched his grand business idea. He had strutted into the conference room wearing a brand new Rolex Daytona, a watch that costs more than my entire yearly salary. He wore a custom-tailored suit and flashed his perfect, expensive smile. Madison sat next to him, beaming with unwarranted pride, while my mother looked at him like he was the second coming of a financial savior. Terrence confidently handed out glossy, poorly designed brochures to everyone at the table. He called his venture a decentralized real estate investment trust powered by blockchain technology. He threw around buzzwords like tokenized equity yield farming and paradigm shift. But as a forensic accountant, I do not look at glossy brochures or listen to sales pitches. I look at the math. Within 5 minutes of his presentation, I asked to see the regulatory filings. Terrence smoothly dodged the question. I asked to see the proof of reserve audits. He laughed condescendingly and told me I was stuck in the traditional banking mindset. Finally, I pointed out the most glaring issue. There were no actual properties attached to his tokenized equity. It was a textbook Ponzi scheme. He was asking for $500,000 to pay off early investors with new investor capital, all hidden behind the complicated veil of cryptocurrency. I had looked directly at my mother across the mahogany table and warned her. I told her it was a scam. I explained that sending company capital to an unregulated wallet was not just irresponsible, It was potentially criminal and could trigger a massive federal audit. Patricia had slammed her hands down on the table, her face twisting with rage. "You have no vision, Natalie," she had screamed at me. "Terrence is an innovator. He is trying to elevate this family to the next level, and all you do is sit there with your calculator and your miserable attitude. You are just jealous and bitter because Madison found a successful husband, and you are pushing 33 with nothing to show for it but a cheap apartment and a spreadsheet." Terrence had simply smirked at me across the table, leaning back in his leather chair, tapping that stolen Rolex against the glass. He knew my mother was an easy mark. He knew she was so desperate to maintain the illusion of high society wealth that she would blindly throw money at anything that sounded sophisticated. Madison had chimed in, accusing me of trying to sabotage her marriage out of spite. They ganged up on me, unified in their delusion, completely ignoring the blatant financial ruin staring them right in the face. Now sitting in the freezing server room, the reality of their betrayal washed over me. Patricia had not just fired me to save money. She fired me because she knew I would eventually notice the missing $500,000 during my end-of-month reconciliation. She needed me out of the building before the quarterly tax filings were due. I was the only person in the company who understood the ledger. She thought by taking away my job and my home, she could silence me, break my spirit, and force me to submit to their narrative. I pulled up another spreadsheet tracing the origin of the $500,000. The sickening truth revealed itself in the columns. Patricia did not have that kind of liquid cash available in the operating account. The business had been bleeding money for months due to her extravagant personal spending and Madison's relentless shopping sprees. To fund Terrence's fraudulent crypto scheme, my mother had authorized a sweep of the employee pension funds. She had stolen the retirement savings of our maintenance workers, our receptionists, and our leasing agents. The computer chimed loudly in the quiet room. The download was complete. I pulled the encrypted drive from the port and slipped it deep into my coat pocket. They had always treated me like the black sheep, the ungrateful daughter who asked too many difficult questions. Madison was the golden child allowed to float through life on a cloud of unearned luxury, while Terrence was the charming prince who could do no wrong. They built an entire castle out of lies funded by the hard work of innocent people and expected me to quietly sweep the dirt under the rug so they could maintain their lavish lifestyle. I stood up and smoothed out my clothes. The initial shock of being publicly humiliated at a country club was gone, replaced by a cold, sharp focus. My mother believed she held all the power because she controlled the family trust and the payroll. She believed I was nothing without her permission to exist in her world. But she had made a fatal miscalculation. She assumed I was weak. She assumed I would beg for my job back and accept my role as the subservient scapegoat. She had no idea that I spent the last 10 years studying every single loophole, every tax code, and every hidden clause in our corporate structure. As I walked out of the dark office building and into the chilly Chicago night, I made a silent vow. I was not just going to survive this betrayal. I was going to systematically dismantle their entire lives. I would let them enjoy their champagne and their fake startups for a few more days. I would let them think they had won. But the clock was ticking, and they had absolutely no idea the storm they had just invited into their world. I gripped the hard drive in my pocket, feeling the weight of the evidence that would send my brother-in-law to federal prison. The game had officially changed, and I was holding all the winning cards. I walked the 6 blocks back to my apartment with the cold Chicago wind biting at my face, but I barely felt it. My mind was already compartmentalizing the crisis. As soon as I unlocked my front door, I ignored the familiar comfort of my living room and went straight to my home office. I pulled out my personal laptop, disconnected it from the internet to ensure no remote wiping could occur, and uploaded the encrypted server files. I needed a secure backup. The 30-day eviction notice my mother had handed me felt like a ticking timer, but I knew I could not stay here that long. They would find ways to make my life miserable. I decided to move my money first thing in the morning, rent a new place, and prepare my legal counterattack. I spent the next 6 days quietly packing my life into cardboard boxes and securing a lease on a small discreet apartment across town. I needed cash for the security deposit and the movers. On the morning of the 7th day, I walked into a local grocery store to grab some coffee and supplies before heading to the bank. I placed my items on the counter and swiped my debit card. Declined. I frowned, assuming it was a chip error, and swiped it again. Insufficient funds, the cashier mumbled, looking past me to the growing line of customers. I stepped aside, pulling out my phone to check my banking app. I had $80,000 in personal life savings in that account. Money I had painstakingly saved by living frugally for the past decade. When the dashboard loaded, my stomach completely dropped. The available balance read exactly $0. Panic is not an emotion I allow myself to entertain, but seeing my entire life savings wiped out sent a violent jolt through my nervous system. I immediately dialed the bank fraud department. After 20 agonizing minutes on hold, a representative verified my identity and pulled up the transaction history. The money was not stolen by a random hacker. It was transferred out legally. The representative explained that the account had been opened when I was 18 years old as a custodial college account. I had never bothered to remove my mother from the signature card because I simply forgot she was on it. Patricia had walked into a physical branch, presented her identification as a joint account holder, and authorized a cashier's check for the entire $80,000. As I stood in the grocery store parking lot gripping my phone, a text message popped up on my screen. It was from Patricia. The message read, "Consider this your contribution to the family. Terrence needed the capital. Grow up and get a real job." She had taken everything. My job, my apartment, and now every single cent I owned. She knew exactly what she was doing. Without that money, I could not pay the security deposit for my new apartment. I could not hire the movers. I could not even afford a decent lawyer to fight the eviction. I was officially destitute. I walked back to my apartment, which was now filled with packed boxes I could no longer afford to move. I had no choice but to abandon my furniture. I stuffed my clothes and my laptop into 2 suitcases, ordered a cheap rideshare with the last $40 on my credit card, and checked into a rundown motel on the outskirts of the city. The motel room smelled like stale cigarette smoke and cheap bleach. The neon sign outside buzzed relentlessly, casting a harsh red light through the thin curtains. I sat on the edge of the lumpy mattress, opened my laptop, and connected to the unsecured public Wi-Fi through a virtual private network. I needed to see exactly what Terrence was doing with my money. I logged into my burner social media account and checked Madison's page. She had just posted a new video. The caption read, "Hubby closed his first seed round, spoiling me today." The video showed Madison sitting in a VIP lounge at a luxury boutique downtown. Resting on her lap was a brand new pristine Hermes Birkin bag. A bag that easily costs $25,000 on the retail market. Terrence was standing behind her, kissing her cheek, still wearing that stolen Rolex. They were literally parading my life savings and the stolen employee pension funds across the internet. Anger finally pierced through my cold, analytical exterior, but I channeled it directly into my keyboard. I opened the encrypted drive again and ran a deep trace on the company ledger. I cross-referenced the wire transfers my mother had authorized with the blockchain transactions on the offshore crypto exchange Terrence was using. It took me 6 hours of relentless coding and data parsing, but I finally broke through the shell companies. The money had not gone into any real estate tokens. Terrence had funneled the $500,000 from the company pension and my $80,000 directly into his personal accounts. He was using the family firm as a massive slush fund to finance his fake millionaire lifestyle, and Patricia was eagerly handing him the keys to the vault. I leaned back against the cheap motel headboard and rubbed my burning eyes. I had undeniable proof of federal wire fraud and embezzlement. I was meticulously compiling the evidence into a secure dossier when a heavy, aggressive knock rattled my motel room door. It was not housekeeping. I closed my laptop, walked over to the door, and looked through the peephole. 2 uniformed police officers were standing on the walkway. My breath hitched. I opened the door slowly. The taller officer looked at a notepad in his hand, and then looked directly at me. "Are you Natalie?" he asked sternly. I nodded. He stepped forward, his expression hardened. "We need to ask you some questions regarding a formal complaint filed by your former employer. You are being accused of embezzling $500,000 from the corporate pension fund before your termination." The trap had been set. My own family was actively trying to send me to federal prison. I stared at the two officers standing in the doorway of my dingy motel room. The red neon light from the sign outside reflected off their metal badges. For a fraction of a second, the sheer audacity of my mother and Terrence almost left me speechless. They had drained my life savings stolen from the company pension fund, and now they were using the police as their personal intimidation squad. But panic is the enemy of strategy. I took a slow, deliberate breath and stepped out of the doorway, forcing them to remain on the exterior walkway. "Officer," I said, my voice completely devoid of emotion. "A formal complaint is just a piece of paper. Do you have a warrant for my arrest or a warrant to search these premises?" The taller officer frowned clearly, not expecting a calm, legally precise response. He shifted his weight, looking slightly uncomfortable. "No, Mom. We do not have a warrant. We are here to ask you some preliminary questions regarding the missing funds. Your mother, Patricia, provided a sworn statement this morning claiming you had sole access to the corporate ledger before your termination." I crossed my arms, feeling the cold night air against my skin. "My mother is the chief executive officer of the company," I replied smoothly. "She has master administrative access to every single account which she exercises frequently. I am a certified forensic accountant. I do not answer preliminary questions about complex corporate finances without my attorney present, and I strongly suggest your Financial Crimes Division subpoena the federal banking records before you take my mother's sworn statement at face value. Now, unless I am under arrest, I am going to close this door." The officers exchanged a glance. They were street patrol, not financial investigators. They knew they were out of their depth the moment I used the words federal banking records. The shorter officer handed me a business card. "A detective will be in touch, miss. Do not leave the city." I took the card, gave them a polite nod, and shut the door, throwing the deadbolt immediately. My hands were shaking, but not from fear. It was pure, unadulterated adrenaline. Patricia and Terrence had just escalated this from a family dispute to a federal criminal matter. They thought they had cornered me. They thought that by freezing my bank accounts and sending the police to my cheap motel, I would break down, call them crying, and beg for mercy. They expected me to sign whatever fake confession they put in front of me just to avoid jail time. They had forgotten one crucial detail about our family history. They had forgotten about Aunt Beatrice. Beatrice was my grandfather's sister, and she was the true architect of our family wealth. While my grandfather was the public face of the real estate empire, Aunt Beatrice was the ruthless, terrifyingly brilliant financial mastermind operating in the shadows. She despised my mother. She always said Patricia had the financial literacy of a spoiled toddler and the ego of a dictator. But Beatrice loved me. She saw past my quiet demeanor and recognized a mind that worked exactly like hers. While Madison was getting manicures and Terrence was running fake college scams, Aunt Beatrice was secretly teaching me how to read complex tax codes, how to structure shell companies, and how to spot a fraudster from a mile away. She passed away 5 years ago, leaving the company in Patricia's hands, or so my mother thought. The next morning, I dressed in my sharpest, most professional suit. I did not look like a broke woman living in a motel. I looked like the lead auditor of a multi-million-dollar firm. I took a city bus downtown, stepping off at the financial district. I walked into the grand lobby of the First Chicago Heritage Bank, a high-security private institution that catered only to the ultra-wealthy. The marble floors echoed under my heels as I approached the private vault desk. "Good morning," I said to the manager, pulling a silver key from a delicate chain around my neck. "I need to access box 4007. The manager checked my identification and guided me into the massive steel vault. He used his master key, I used mine, and the heavy metal door of the safe deposit box clicked open. He left me alone in a private viewing room. I pulled out a stack of pristine, heavy parchment documents. This was Aunt Beatrice's final masterpiece, the secret she made me swear to keep until the exact right moment. I opened the first leather-bound folder. It was the original operating agreement for the family company, accompanied by a legally binding, irrevocable trust. When Beatrice died, Patricia assumed she inherited the company outright. She paraded around town acting like the supreme owner. But Patricia was nothing more than a puppet chief executive officer. The company, every single building, and every bank account were actually owned by the Caldwell Family Trust. And right there on the third page was Aunt Beatrice's signature, notarized and filed perfectly. She had appointed me as the absolute trust protector. The clause was brilliantly brutal. It stated that upon my 33rd birthday, I would gain 51% voting power over the entire trust, giving me absolute authority to fire the chief executive officer, liquidate assets, or freeze the company operations entirely. My 33rd birthday had been exactly 2 weeks ago. I was no longer an employee. I was the majority owner of the empire. I ran my fingers over Aunt Beatrice's signature, a fierce protective warmth spreading through my chest. Patricia and Terence thought they were playing chess against a helpless pawn. They had no idea I already owned the entire board. But I could not just walk into the office and announce my ownership. If I did that now, Terence would panic and try to flee the country with the $500,000 he stole from the pension fund. I needed to trap them perfectly. I needed them to admit their crimes on the official record. I carefully placed the documents in my briefcase and walked out of the bank. The sun was shining brightly over the Chicago skyline. I pulled out my phone and drafted an email to my mother and Terence. I stripped all my pride away and wrote the most pathetic, desperate message possible. I typed out the words with a steady hand, ensuring every sentence sounded completely broken. I told them my debit card had been declined at the grocery store and that I was currently sleeping in a cheap motel. I begged them to drop the police charges, claiming I was entirely out of money, out of options, and utterly terrified of going to federal prison. I apologized for questioning Terence's brilliant investment strategy and asked if there was any way we could resolve this quietly. I knew their massive egos would never let them pass up the opportunity to crush me legally and force a written surrender. I hit send and watched the email vanish into cyberspace. I was setting the perfect bait, and I knew beyond a shadow of a doubt that they would bite. Less than 20 minutes after I hit send on that pathetic begging email, my phone vibrated on the cheap motel nightstand. I did not receive a direct reply. Instead, a notification popped up from the hidden administrative backdoor I had installed on the company server years ago. It gave me real-time access to the family executive group chat. I opened the application and watched the text bubbles appear on my screen. Patricia had taken a screenshot of my email and sent it to Madison and Terence. "Look who finally hit rock bottom," she typed, followed by a laughing emoji. "I told you she would crack within a week," Madison replied immediately. "Ew, she is sleeping in a motel. That is so embarrassing. Tell her to stay away from the country club. I do not want my friends seeing her looking homeless." Then Terence chimed in. "Let me handle this. I am going to draft a little contract for our dear sister. We hold all the leverage now. We make her sign away everything, or we let the cops drag her out of that motel in handcuffs." I sat back against the headboard, staring at the glowing screen. They were so blinded by their own arrogance that they did not even consider the possibility of a trap. Terence, who barely passed high school math, thought he was outsmarting a certified forensic accountant. I watched the typing indicator bounce for another few minutes as they mocked my living situation and celebrated their complete victory. I closed the app and waited. 2 hours later, an official email arrived from Terence's corporate account. The subject line read, "Settlement offer and release of liability." I opened the attached document and began to read. It was a masterpiece of sheer, unadulterated stupidity. Terence had clearly pieced it together using free legal templates he found online, but the demands were crystal clear. The contract stipulated that the company would drop all criminal embezzlement charges against me. In exchange, I had to formally admit in writing that I was responsible for the missing $500,000. Furthermore, I was required to permanently surrender any and all future rights to the Caldwell family estate, the company shares, and any inheritance from my mother. It was a predatory extortion contract designed to strip me of my birthright and force me to take the fall for his federal wire fraud. I read the document 3 times just to be absolutely sure. By sending this contract across state lines via email demanding property and inheritance rights under the direct threat of criminal prosecution, Terrence had just committed textbook federal extortion and mail fraud. He had documented his own crime and delivered it straight into my inbox. I printed the document at the motel front desk. I took a black pen and signed my name on the bottom line without a second's hesitation. I scanned the signed copy and emailed it right back to him with a short message. I signed it. Please just call off the police. His reply came exactly 1 minute later. A single thumbs up emoji, followed by a second email containing a mandatory summons. Since I had signed the admission of guilt, Patricia wanted to humiliate me one last time before letting me off the hook. The summons demanded my presence at a formal pretrial deposition at her lawyer's office the following morning. They wanted my fake confession legally sworn on the record just to make sure I could never change my mind. It was exactly what I needed them to do. The next morning, I prepared myself for the lion's den. I deliberately chose the most worn-out, ill-fitting suit I owned. I wanted to look exactly like the broken, defeated woman they expected to see. I skipped my morning coffee so I would look exhausted. I left the briefcase containing Aunt Beatrice's irrevocable trust hidden safely in my motel room and took a city bus to the prestigious downtown law firm my mother kept on retainer. The law firm of Kensington and Roth occupied the top 3 floors of a sleek glass skyscraper. The lobby was all imported Italian marble and brushed steel. A receptionist in a tailored dress looked me up and down with barely concealed disdain before directing me to conference room B. I pushed open the heavy oak door. The room smelled like expensive cologne and leather. My mother, Patricia, sat at the head of the long mahogany table, wearing a sharp white power suit, looking like a monarch holding court. Madison was sitting next to her, scrolling through her phone and loudly filing her acrylic nails, completely disinterested in the legal proceedings. And then there was Terrence. He was sitting across from them, leaning dangerously far back in his ergonomic leather chair with his expensive shoes resting casually on top of the polished mahogany table. He wore a smug, self-satisfied grin and tapped a gold pen against his chin. Next to Patricia sat her high-priced corporate attorney, looking bored and slightly annoyed to be dealing with such a trivial family matter. At the corner of the table, a court reporter sat quietly with her fingers hovering over a stenography machine ready to capture every single word spoken. "Well, well, well," Terrence said loudly, breaking the silence as I walked in. "Look who decided to show up. You look terrible, Natalie. Motel life is not treating you well, I see." Patricia sighed dramatically and adjusted her diamond necklace. "Let us just get this over with quickly. I have a charity luncheon at 1 o'clock, and I do not want to lose my appetite. Sit down, Natalie." I pulled out a chair at the far end of the table and sat down, keeping my eyes lowered, acting perfectly intimidated. The attorney cleared his throat and officially opened the deposition, stating the date, the case number, and the names of everyone present. He reminded me that I was under oath, and that every word I said was being recorded. "Ms. Caldwell," the attorney began, looking at me over his reading glasses, "you have signed a settlement agreement admitting fault for the missing funds and surrendering your rights to the family estate. Is this correct?" "Yes," I whispered, making my voice sound small and fragile. Terrence let out a loud, arrogant chuckle. "It is about time you learned your place," he muttered. I looked up slowly, letting my eyes meet Terrence's. The attorney was preparing to ask the next standard question, but I interrupted him. My voice was no longer small. "I need to ask a few clarifying questions for the official record before we finalize this," I said. "Since I am representing myself pro se, I have the legal right to question the plaintiffs regarding the corporate structure and their authority to execute this agreement. The attorney frowned, clearly irritated by the procedural delay, but he nodded. Make it brief. I turned my attention entirely to my mother. Patricia, I said, keeping my tone even and curious. Just so I understand the terms I am agreeing to, can you confirm under oath that you have sole executive authority over the Caldwell family firm? That no one else controls the assets? Patricia rolled her eyes and scoffed. Obviously. I am the chief executive officer. The company is mine, and I make every single financial decision. You know this, Natalie. Stop wasting my time. I nodded slowly. The court reporter typed furiously, capturing her exact words. And Terrence, I continued, turning to him. You claim I stole $500,000. But as the self-proclaimed financial director of this new crypto venture, can you explain to the record how that specific amount of money was moved from the employee pension fund into your offshore accounts? Terrence took his feet off the table and leaned forward, his ego completely overriding any basic legal sense. He could not resist the chance to brag about his fake brilliance on the official record. You did not steal it, he sneered. I moved it. I authorized the wire transfer myself, using Patricia's credentials, because I am the financial visionary of this family. I took that stagnant pension money and put it into a high-yield decentralized token. I made the executive call. You just got fired because you were too stupid to understand my strategy. I stared at him, letting the silence hang in the air for 5 agonizing seconds. The court reporter hit the final key on her machine. I had just successfully baited both the chief executive officer and the shadow director into openly confessing to embezzlement, wire fraud, and federal perjury on a sworn legal transcript. I smiled for the first time since I walked into the room. The court reporter hit the final key on her machine and closed it with a sharp, definitive click. That sound echoed in the quiet conference room like a heavy steel door slamming shut. I immediately dropped my smile and returned my face to a mask of complete submission. I looked down at my hands, letting my shoulders slump forward, playing the part of the defeated sister perfectly. Terrence stood up from the massive mahogany table and stretched his arms wide, as if he had just won a grueling athletic championship. He adjusted his stolen Rolex and let out a long, satisfied sigh. Glad we got that sorted, he said, his voice dripping with condescension. You see, Natalie, this is what happens when you try to play in the big leagues without understanding the rules. You got confused by the numbers, panicked, and made a mess. I am just cleaning it up. It was the ultimate gaslight. He had literally just confessed on a sworn legal transcript to executing unauthorized wire transfers from a federally protected employee pension fund. Yet he stood there in his expensive tailored suit, genuinely believing he was the hero of the story. His narcissism was so profound that it completely blinded him to the legal trap he had just walked right into. Patricia stood up and smoothed out her pristine white power suit. She walked over to my side of the table, looking down at me with an expression of manufactured pity. She placed a cold hand on my shoulder. You brought this entirely on yourself, Natalie, she said softly, making sure her attorney could hear how benevolent she sounded. I gave you every opportunity to succeed in the family business, but you were always so stubborn, so jealous of your sister. Signing this confession was the right thing to do. Now we can finally put this ugly chapter behind us. Madison did not even bother to look up from her phone. Whatever she muttered, popping a piece of chewing gum. Just stay away from our house, Natalie. You are bad energy. I stood up slowly, clutching my cheap briefcase. I did not say a single word in response. I did not need to. I gave a polite nod to the attorney, walked out of the conference room, and headed straight for the elevators. My heart was pounding a steady rhythmic beat against my ribs. The adrenaline was sharp and clear. I pressed the button for the lobby and watched the floor numbers light up as the elevator descended. They thought the game was over. They thought they had secured their wealth and forced me to take the fall for their crimes. When the elevator doors slid open into the expansive marble lobby of the law firm, my immediate plan was to walk outside and call my contact at the Federal Bureau of Investigation. But my family had prepared one final devastating surprise. Standing directly in the center of the lobby waiting for me were 2 uniformed city police officers and a plainclothes detective holding a manila folder. The receptionist was pointing discreetly in my direction. The detective stepped forward, blocking my path to the revolving glass exit doors. Natalie Caldwell. He asked, his voice firm and authoritative. Yes, I replied, stopping completely still. I am Detective Miller, with the Financial Crimes Unit, he said, holding up his badge. Your mother, Patricia Caldwell, filed a formal criminal complaint this morning, supported by a signed confession you emailed to her last night. We are here to take you into custody on charges of corporate embezzlement and wire fraud. The stakes had just skyrocketed into the stratosphere. Patricia and Terrence never had any intention of letting me walk away quietly. The settlement agreement they forced me to sign was nothing but a weapon to secure an immediate arrest warrant. They were actively trying to send me to federal prison right now today to permanently cover Terrence and his tracks. They wanted me locked in a holding cell before I could ever speak to a lawyer or access my bank accounts. At that exact moment, the elevator chimed again. Patricia, Terrence, and Madison stepped out into the lobby. They stopped a few feet away, watching the scene unfold with barely contained glee. Patricia raised a hand to her mouth, faking an expression of maternal shock for the benefit of the surrounding law firm staff. "Oh my goodness, officer," she gasped, stepping forward. "Is this really necessary? She is my daughter. We just finished mediation." Detective Miller looked at her sympathetically. "I am sorry, Mom, but a signed confession for $500,000 triggers an automatic arrest mandate. We have to take her downtown for processing. You did the right thing by reporting it." Terrence crossed his arms and smirked at me, his eyes gleaming with malicious triumph. "See you around, Nat," he whispered under his breath. I looked at the detective and then at my family. I did not panic. I did not scream. As a forensic accountant, I know that whoever controls the paper trail controls the entire narrative. "Detective Miller," I said, my voice completely calm and level, echoing clearly across the marble lobby. "I strongly advise you not to place those handcuffs on me. The document my mother provided you was obtained through federal mail extortion. Furthermore, the plaintiffs have just spent the last hour in Conference Room B on the 20th floor committing textbook federal perjury on a sworn legal transcript." The detective's brow furrowed. He hesitated, his hand pausing over his utility belt. "Excuse me." I turned slightly and pointed directly at Terrence. That man just stated under oath on the official court reporter's record that he personally executed the wire transfers from the company pension fund into an unregulated offshore cryptocurrency exchange. My mother, Patricia, also swore under oath that she authorized it. They just confessed to the very crime they are accusing me of. Patricia's fake, sympathetic expression instantly vanished, replaced by a look of sheer panic. "She is lying," she snapped, her voice shrill. "Officer, arrest her right now. She is delusional." I ignored her and kept my eyes locked on the detective. "I am a certified forensic accountant." I continued, projecting absolute authority. "I have already secured the server logs, the blockchain routing numbers, and the original ledger. If you arrest me on false pretenses based on a fraudulent confession, I will ensure the federal courts tear this department apart for wrongful imprisonment. Do not take my word for it. Go upstairs to Conference Room B right now and subpoena the court reporter's stenography tape before they have a chance to destroy it." The lobby fell completely silent. The smug smirk on Terrence's face melted away entirely, leaving behind a mask of terrified realization. He finally understood the clarifying questions I had asked upstairs. He realized I had baited him into bragging about moving the money on the official record. Detective Miller looked at my mother, who was suddenly pale and trembling. Then he looked back at me. "Are you telling me there is a sworn transcript upstairs contradicting this criminal complaint?" he asked, his tone shifting. "Yes, Detective," I smiled. "Grab it before he flees." Detective Foster did not hesitate. He gave a sharp nod to his partner, and the two officers immediately bypassed us, heading straight for the bank of elevators to secure the stenography tape. Terrence took a sudden, panicked step backward. His expensive leather shoes squeaked loudly against the polished marble floor. His eyes darted wildly toward the glass exit doors, visibly calculating his chances of outrunning the police. But a third uniformed officer stepped seamlessly into his path, resting a firm hand on his utility belt. The reality of federal prison finally crashed down over Terrence, erasing every ounce of his arrogant swagger. Patricia began screaming, her voice echoing shrilly off the high ceilings as she realized Terrence had just thrown her under the bus on the official legal record. Madison burst into loud, ugly tears, wailing about how the police presence was going to ruin her social standing at the country club. I did not stay to watch the officers place them in handcuffs. I had already set the legal machinery in motion, and the federal investigators would meticulously handle the rest. I turned my back on my screaming family, pushed through the heavy revolving doors, and stepped out into the crisp Chicago air. The criminal trap was perfectly executed, but my work was not entirely finished. Patricia still technically had her name on the company bank accounts. If she managed to post bail or contact a clever defense attorney from holding, she might try to wire whatever remaining liquid capital we had left to a hidden offshore haven. I needed to cut off the head of the snake permanently. I hailed a passing black town car and gave the driver the address for First Chicago Heritage Bank. First Chicago Heritage Bank was not a commercial branch where ordinary people deposited their weekly paychecks. It was an ultra-exclusive private wealth management institution located in the heart of the financial district. It catered exclusively to generational wealth, massive corporate trusts, and untouchable family estates. The building itself looked like a fortress of limestone and granite. I walked through the towering mahogany doors, bypassing the quiet reception area entirely, and headed straight for the private subterranean elevators. As the elevator descended deep beneath the city streets, I reached under the collar of my cheap blazer and pulled out a heavy silver key. I had worn this key on a chain around my neck every single day for the past 5 years. Its cool metal pressed against my skin served as a constant daily reminder of the woman who had truly raised me. Aunt Beatrice was my grandfather's sister, and she was the ruthless, terrifyingly brilliant mastermind behind the entire Caldwell family wealth. While my grandfather was the smiling, charismatic public face of the real estate empire, Beatrice was the silent architect operating in the shadows. She possessed a mind like a steel trap and a heart that had no patience for fools. Beatrice absolutely despised my mother. She frequently remarked that Patricia had the financial literacy of a spoiled toddler and the bloated ego of a dictator. Beatrice knew that if Patricia was left unchecked, she would eventually burn the family legacy to the ground just to buy designer shoes and impress her shallow country club friends. But Beatrice loved me. She looked past my quiet, observant demeanor and recognized a mind that operated exactly like hers. While Patricia was dragging my sister Madison to expensive beauty pageants and elite social mixers, Beatrice was dragging me into corporate boardrooms. She did not teach me how to bake cookies or arrange flowers. She taught me how to read complex tax codes. She paid for my entire education and pushed me to become a certified forensic accounting expert. Under her strict tutelage, I learned how to track laundered money through multiple shell companies. I learned how to spot the hidden stories buried deep within dense spreadsheets. I learned that true power does not roar from a podium or boast at a dinner party. True power operates quietly in the background, analyzing the data, holding the strings, and waiting for the exact right moment to strike. Beatrice forged me into a weapon. She knew a day would come when Patricia would try to destroy me, and she made sure I was heavily armed for the war. The elevator doors opened, revealing the quiet, climate-controlled vault level. I walked past the armed security guards and stepped into the private office of Mr. Harrington, the senior trust director. He was an older man with silver hair and a meticulously tailored suit. He looked up from his desk, slightly surprised by my sudden, unannounced appearance. "Good morning, Mr. Harrington," I said, taking a seat in the leather chair opposite him. "It is time." His eyes widened in understanding. He immediately stood up, locked his office door, and guided me into the master vault room. I used my silver key, he used his master key, and we extracted the heavy steel lockbox containing the Caldwell Irrevocable Trust. We returned to his office, and I placed the original notarized documents firmly on his desk. 5 years ago, Beatrice had legally appointed me as the absolute trust protector. The clause explicitly stated that upon my 33rd birthday, I would instantly gain 51% voting power over the entire trust. This gave me the absolute unchallenged legal authority to fire the chief executive officer, liquidate any assets, or freeze the company operations entirely. My 33rd birthday had passed exactly 2 weeks ago. I am officially invoking my authority as the trust protector. I said, my voice cold and unwavering. I want you to immediately freeze every single bank account associated with the Caldwell corporate entity. Revoke Patricia Caldwell's signatory rights across all platforms. Block all outbound wire transfers, cancel her corporate credit cards, and freeze the joint personal accounts she holds with my sister Madison. Mr. Harrington did not ask any questions. He simply nodded, his fingers flying across his computer keyboard as he executed my orders. He knew better than to question the legal structure Aunt Beatrice had so carefully designed. I sat in the leather chair and watched the computer screen as the access codes turned from green to red. In less than 3 minutes, the entire financial lifeline of my mother, my sister, and my brother-in-law was completely severed. They had spent the morning trying to evict me and send me to prison. They would spend their afternoon realizing they were entirely locked out of their own lives, completely penniless and entirely at my mercy. I sat back in the leather guest chair, watching the final confirmation screens blink out on the banker's monitor. Mr. Harrington closed his laptop with a soft, definitive click and slid the heavy stack of parchment back across the polished mahogany desk toward me. "We have secured the perimeter, Natalie," he said, his voice hushed and reverent in the quiet vault room. "Now let us review the exact architecture of your new empire." He reached into the steel lockbox and pulled out the thickest leather-bound folder I had ever seen. I pulled the folder toward me and opened the heavy cover. The scent of old paper and sealing wax filled the air. Inside rested the original operating agreement for the Caldwell family firm, accompanied by the complete, unredacted, irrevocable trust document. As a forensic accountant, I have spent my entire career dissecting complex corporate structures, but seeing Aunt Beatrice's master plan laid out in perfect legal syntax was nothing short of breathtaking. It was the most brilliant long con I had ever witnessed. For the past 5 years, Patricia had strutted through the country club and the corporate office acting like a billionaire matriarch. She threw lavish galas, demanded absolute obedience, and treated the company ledgers like her own personal checking account. She truly believed that when Beatrice passed away, the will had left her everything. But as I read the first page of the trust agreement, the truth hit me like a physical shockwave. The will Patricia had read was essentially an empty vessel. Exactly 1 year before she died, Beatrice had quietly and legally transferred 100% of her shares, the real estate portfolio, and all liquid assets into this irrevocable trust. Patricia did not own a single brick of the Caldwell empire. She was completely devoid of any equity whatsoever. I looked up at Mr. Harrington, my eyes wide. "She is just an employee," I whispered, the realization settling in. Mr. Harrington offered a rare, tight-lipped smile. "Precisely. Your mother is listed as the managing director, a standard W-2 employee. Aunt Beatrice gave her the honorary title of chief executive officer and a massive annual salary to keep her complacent and feed her enormous ego. But Patricia has never held a single voting share in this company. She has been a puppet dancing on strings she did not even know existed." I turned the page, my heart racing as I read the specific clauses governing the executive roles. Because Patricia was merely an at-will employee, her decision to terminate my employment last week was legally void. She did not have the required board approval to fire the lead forensic accountant. Furthermore, her authorization to wire $500,000 of company funds to Terrence's offshore cryptocurrency exchange was not just embezzlement. It was a direct violation of her employment contract, which instantly triggered a poison pill clause Beatrice had hidden on page 42. The clause stated that any executive who attempted to defraud the trust would instantly forfeit their salary, their severance package, and any future rights to the family estate. Patricia had literally signed her own financial death warrant the second she approved Terrence's fake investment. But the most devastating piece of the puzzle was the trust protector clause. In standard trust law, a protector is an independent third party appointed to watch over the trustees and ensure the creator's wishes are honored. Beatrice had taken it a step further. She had weaponized the position. I ran my finger over Beatrice's familiar, elegant signature at the bottom of the document. She had named me the sole trust protector. But she did not just give me oversight. She gave me 51% voting power over the entire entity. I was not just a shareholder. I possessed the absolute unchallenged authority to fire the chief executive officer, dissolve the board, liquidate the assets, or change the beneficiaries entirely. I was the absolute dictator of the Caldwell family wealth. And the activation date for this immense power was not tied to Beatrice's death. It was tied to a very specific milestone. The clause explicitly stated that the trust protector powers would remain dormant until my 33rd birthday. I sat back in the chair, the weight of that number washing over me, 33. I remembered sitting in Beatrice's grand library when I was a teenager, listening to her tell stories about her youth. 33 was the exact age Beatrice had closed her first $1 million commercial real estate deal. She always called it the age of true financial maturity. She knew that if she handed me the keys to the kingdom when I was 28, I might have been manipulated by my mother. I might have tried to save them. Beatrice purposely designed this timeline to give me a decade of brutal forensic accounting experience. She wanted me to learn how to hunt corporate criminals, so that when Patricia inevitably tried to destroy me, I would have the exact skills required to dissect her and cut her out of the family forever. My 33rd birthday was exactly 2 weeks ago. The trap had sprung the very same week they tried to throw me out on the street. I looked down at the documents, feeling an incredible surge of power and clarity. At this exact moment, Terrence was sitting in a police interrogation room, sweating through his tailored suit, facing federal wire fraud charges. Patricia and Madison were likely pacing the lobby of the police precinct, screaming at the desk sergeants and trying to contact a high-priced defense attorney. Very soon, Patricia would pull out her platinum corporate credit card to pay the massive retainer fee. She would hand it to the lawyer, the card would be swiped, and it would decline. She would call the bank, scream at the representatives, and demand they release her funds. And that is when the cold, dark reality would finally set in. They had no money, they had no house, they had no power. I carefully organized the documents, sliding them back into the thick leather folder. I needed these originals for the final blow. Despite the criminal charges pending against Terrence, Patricia had still filed a civil lawsuit against me, claiming I stole the money. We still had a mandatory court date scheduled for the civil dispute. She thought she was going to walk into that courtroom and use her expensive lawyers to crush her penniless daughter and secure a default judgment. She had no idea she was about to walk into a slaughterhouse. "Mr. Harrington," I said, standing up and placing the folder securely into my briefcase. "Please ensure the asset freeze remains absolute. Do not accept any phone calls from my mother or my sister. If their legal counsel attempts to contact the bank, refer them directly to the trust charter." "You have my word, Natalie," he replied, standing up and offering his hand. "Aunt Beatrice would be incredibly proud of you today." I shook his hand, feeling a deep sense of closure. I walked out of the vault, leaving the subterranean fortress behind, and rode the elevator back up to the lobby. When I stepped out into the bustling Chicago streets, the sun felt warmer than it had all week. I had walked into the bank as a homeless, unemployed scapegoat fleeing a false arrest warrant. I was walking out as the majority owner of a multi-million-dollar real estate empire, holding the exact legal weapon I needed to finish this war once and for all. I pulled out my phone, ordered a private car to take me to a luxury hotel downtown, and prepared myself for the final courtroom showdown. The private town car glided through the bustling downtown traffic and pulled to a smooth stop in front of the Waldorf Astoria. A uniformed doorman opened my door, and I stepped out onto the pristine pavement. For the first time in weeks, I was not counting pennies or worrying about eviction. I walked straight up to the marble reception desk and booked their largest corner penthouse suite for the night, paying with the new corporate platinum card Mr. Harrington had just issued to me under the trust. When I reached the top floor, I dropped my cheap motel suitcase on the plush carpet and walked over to the floor-to-ceiling windows. The city of Chicago stretched out beneath me, glittering in the late afternoon sun. But I did not have time to admire the view. I opened my laptop and connected to the high-speed secure network. The criminal side of my revenge was already in motion, with Terrence sitting in a police holding cell, but the civil side required extreme precision. I realized I could not just reveal the irrevocable trust to my mother over a phone call or a legal letter. If I simply told Patricia she was fired and locked out of the accounts, her narcissism would drive her to wage a relentless, exhausting guerrilla war against me in the media and through endless, frivolous lawsuits. I needed to legally destroy Patricia, so entirely in a court of law that she could never retaliate. I opened the backdoor application on my computer that gave me direct access to the family executive group chat. The screen immediately lit up with a chaotic flurry of text messages. Patricia and Madison were spiraling into absolute panic. Their digital footprint was a masterpiece of entitlement and confusion. Madison had sent a series of crying emojis followed by an all-caps message complaining that her black card had been declined at the Four Seasons Spa. Patricia was firing off frantic texts demanding to know why the bank managers at First Chicago Heritage were refusing to take her calls. They were slowly realizing that their financial oxygen had been completely cut off, but they had not yet connected the freeze to me. Patricia assumed the police had temporarily locked the corporate accounts because of Terrence and his wire fraud arrest. She was angry, embarrassed, and desperate for a scapegoat. This presented a strategic risk. If Patricia felt too cornered, she might realize the severity of her situation and attempt to skip our mandatory civil court hearing scheduled for the next morning. She might try to flee to her vacation home in Florida or claim medical distress to delay the proceedings. I needed her in that courtroom. I needed her standing in front of a federal judge, overflowing with her signature arrogance, ready to swear on the record that she was the absolute owner of the company. The only way to guarantee she would show up was to make her believe she was walking into an effortless victory. I had to feed her ego one last massive meal. I opened my email client and drafted a direct message to my mother. I channeled every ounce of the pathetic, defeated persona she had always projected onto me. I typed quickly, deliberately, adding a few grammatical errors to make it look like I was shaking and crying while writing it. The email read, "Mom, I am terrified. I just saw what happened to Terrence in the lobby with the police. I know you are furious with me, but please, I am begging you to drop the civil lawsuit against me tomorrow. I have absolutely no money for a lawyer to represent me. I am entirely bankrupt. If we go to court, I will lose everything. Please let us settle this as a family. I will sign whatever you want, just please do not destroy me in front of the judge tomorrow." I hovered my mouse over the send button. It was a humiliating message to write, but as a forensic accountant, I knew that pride was a liability when building a foolproof trap. I clicked send. I instantly shifted my eyes back to the group chat monitor on my second screen, waiting for the bait to drop. It took exactly 4 minutes for my email to register in Patricia's inbox. A screenshot of my desperate plea appeared in the chat thread uploaded by my mother. Patricia sent a laughing emoji. "Look at this pathetic garbage," she typed to Madison. "She is begging for mercy. She actually thinks I care about settling this as a family after she embarrassed us in the lobby today." Madison replied instantly. "Oh my God, she is so broke. Do not let her off the hook, Mom. We need to crush her tomorrow. We can use the civil judgment to prove to the police that she is the real thief and get Terrence out of jail." My mother was so blinded by her hatred for me that she completely ignored her own financial crisis. Her response in the chat was a textbook example of malignant narcissism. "I am not dropping anything," Patricia typed. "If the police froze my accounts because of her little stunt today, I am going to use the civil hearing to legally destroy her. Without a lawyer, she will be slaughtered by my legal team. The judge will grant me a default judgment, and I will garnish whatever pathetic wages she earns for the rest of her miserable life. See you in court, Natalie." I leaned back in my plush hotel chair and closed the chat application. The trap was locked. My mother was emboldened by her own arrogance, completely convinced that my lack of legal representation meant she had already won the war. She had no idea that my email was a carefully crafted illusion designed to march her directly into a legal execution. She was going to walk into that courtroom tomorrow morning, expecting to crush a defenseless victim. Instead, she was going to face the absolute unrivaled power of the Caldwell Trust Protector. I ordered a dry martini from room service, opened my briefcase, and began organizing the original trust documents for tomorrow. The board was set, the pieces were in place, and checkmate was only a few hours away. I took a sip of the dry martini room service had just delivered and leaned back into the plush sofa. The ice clinked softly against the crystal glass. My phone buzzed on the coffee table. I glanced at the screen and saw a new email notification. The sender name made me sit up straight. It was from Terrence. I checked the executive group chat log on my secondary monitor. Sure enough, Patricia had managed to secure a shady emergency bail bondsman using Madison's personal jewelry as collateral just hours before Mr. Harrington enacted the total freeze on their joint accounts. Terrence was temporarily out of police custody, but he was backed into a corner. The federal wire fraud charges were looming over his head, and his massive ego was bruised. Instead of calling a competent defense attorney and keeping his mouth shut, Terrence decided to play lawyer himself. I opened the email. The subject line read, "Final offer to save your life." The body of the message was dripping with his signature arrogance, masking a deep underlying panic. Terrence wrote that the police arrest in the lobby was just a minor setback, a temporary misunderstanding that he was already clearing up. He claimed that if I went to court tomorrow, my mother would completely destroy me and the judge would throw me in prison for the missing $500,000. But he generously offered he was willing to make all the legal trouble disappear. He attached a PDF document titled Complete Settlement and Admission of Guilt. I downloaded the file and opened it on my screen. As I read through the paragraphs, I actually had to suppress a laugh. Terrence had clearly pieced this document together using free legal templates he found on the internet, but he had added his own draconian clauses. The contract was predatory in the most literal sense of the word. The terms were laid out in stark black and white. Terrence and Patricia offered to completely drop the civil lawsuit and formally retract their criminal complaints with the police. In exchange, I had to do two things. First, I had to provide a written, legally binding admission that I was the sole mastermind who embezzled the $500,000 from the employee pension fund. Second, I was required to permanently sign away any and all future rights to the Caldwell family estate, including any inheritance, corporate shares, or trust disbursements. I set my martini glass down and stared at the glowing screen. Terrence and Patricia genuinely thought they were executing a brilliant checkmate. They wanted me to take the fall for the federal crimes Terrence committed, and they wanted to use this opportunity to legally strip me of my birthright forever. They wanted to present this signed confession to the judge tomorrow morning to clear Terrence's name and secure their complete ownership of the family empire. What they did not understand was that they had just handed me a loaded gun. As a forensic accountant who works closely with federal investigators, I know the exact statutes regarding coercion and fraud. You absolutely cannot use the threat of criminal prosecution to leverage a civil settlement. You cannot hold the threat of prison over someone's head to force them to surrender their financial assets and inheritance rights. Under the United States Legal Code, that specific action is classified as extortion. Furthermore, by transmitting this threat and the fraudulent contract across state servers via email, Terrence had just committed textbook federal wire fraud and mail fraud. He had meticulously documented his own felony, typed it out clearly, and delivered it straight into my inbox. I did not call a lawyer. I did not hesitate. I opened a digital signature application, selected a red ink font, and signed my name on the bottom line of his predatory contract. I saved the document, attached it to a new email, and hit reply. I kept my message incredibly brief, maintaining the illusion of a broken, defeated woman. I wrote, "I signed it. I surrender. Please just leave me alone tomorrow and tell the police to drop the charges." I clicked send and immediately turned my eyes back to the hidden group chat monitor. It took less than 2 minutes for the text bubbles to start flying. Terrence uploaded a screenshot of my signed confession to the chat. Got her, he typed, adding a string of celebratory emojis. I told you she would crack. She is so terrified of going to jail that she just handed us the entire company. Patricia replied a moment later. Brilliant work, Terrence. I will print this out immediately and give it to my attorney. When we walk into the courtroom tomorrow, we will hand this directly to the judge. The civil case will be closed, she will be disinherited, and the police will have their prime suspect for the missing money. We finally cut the dead weight out of this family, Madison chimed in. Thank God. Now can we please focus on getting my credit cards unblocked? I have a spa appointment tomorrow afternoon. I watched their digital celebration unfold with a profound sense of cold satisfaction. They were celebrating a victory that did not exist. They firmly believed they had won the war, completely unaware that the document they were holding was legally classified as extortion. They thought they were building a shield, but they had just finished constructing their own prison cell. I printed a high-resolution copy of the signed extortion contract and slipped it into the leather folder alongside Aunt Beatrice's irrevocable trust. The dossier was now complete. I had the server logs proving Terrence stole the money. I had the banking records proving Patricia authorized the theft. I had the irrevocable trust proving I was the absolute majority owner of the Caldwell empire. And now I had a signed timestamped document proving they attempted to extort me through federal wire fraud. I closed my laptop and walked back over to the expansive windows of the penthouse suite. The city lights of Chicago sparkled against the dark night sky. Tomorrow morning, I was going to walk into that civil courtroom. Patricia would be sitting there in her designer suit, armed with a fake confession and an arrogant smile, expecting the judge to hand her my life on a silver platter. She was going to mock me for not having a lawyer. She was going to look down on me exactly like she did at the country club 3 weeks ago. But tomorrow there would be no tears, no compromises, and no mercy. I finished the last sip of my martini and turned off the lights. I was ready for court. The morning sun crept over Lake Michigan, casting a golden glow across the penthouse suite of the Waldorf Astoria. I stood in front of the floor-to-ceiling mirror and prepared my costume for the final act. I bypassed the row of expensive tailored clothes I had just purchased and reached for the same worn-out, ill-fitting gray suit I had worn to the police station. The fabric was cheap, the shoulders slumped, and it projected the exact image of a defeated, penniless woman. I tied my hair back into a messy knot and deliberately skipped makeup. I needed to look like a desperate victim who had spent the night crying in a motel room, not a forensic accountant who had just seized control of a multi-million-dollar real estate empire. I placed the original irrevocable trust documents and the printed extortion contract into my battered leather briefcase, took a steadying breath, and walked out the door. My mother had demanded a mandatory pre-trial deposition at her expensive law firm before we crossed the street to the federal courthouse. She wanted the extortion contract formally entered into the legal record under oath, ensuring that I could not back out or change my story in front of the judge. I took a cab to the financial district and rode the elevator up to the top floor of Kensington and Roth. The mahogany doors opened into a sprawling reception area that smelled of wealth and intimidation. The receptionist gave me a thoroughly condescending look before pointing me down the long glass-walled hallway toward the main boardroom. I pushed open the heavy double doors and walked directly into the lion's den. The room was vast, dominated by a massive polished oak table that stretched for 20 feet. The entire opposing force was already assembled, waiting to execute my legal execution. Terrence was sitting near the head of the table. Despite the fact that he was currently out on bail and facing federal wire fraud charges, he still projected an aura of insufferable arrogance. He had his expensive leather shoes propped up right on top of the polished table. He leaned back in his ergonomic chair, hands laced behind his head, acting like a conquering king. But my trained eyes caught the subtle details his bravado could not hide. The dark circles under his eyes were prominent. His tailored suit was slightly wrinkled from spending 12 hours in a police holding cell, and when he shifted his weight, the bulky outline of a court-mandated ankle monitor pressed against the fabric of his trousers. Next to him sat my sister Madison. She was aggressively filing her acrylic nails with a crystal emery board, the harsh scraping sound echoing in the quiet room. She looked furious, but not about the impending legal battle. She slammed her nail file down and glared at my mother. "I still do not understand why my platinum card was declined at the spa this morning," Madison complained loudly, completely ignoring my entrance. "The bank manager refused to take my calls. You need to fix this right now, Mom. It is incredibly embarrassing." Patricia sat at the absolute head of the table, flanked by her high-priced corporate defense attorney, Mr. Prescott. She waved her hand dismissively at Madison. "The bank is just doing a routine security freeze because of the police incident yesterday." Patricia snapped, her voice tight with irritation. "I will have it cleared up by noon. Now be quiet, your sister is here. Let us get this unpleasant business over with so we can go to the courthouse and finalize the judgment." Patricia turned her gaze toward me, and her expression instantly shifted into a mask of utter disgust. She looked me up and down, taking in my cheap gray suit and my tired appearance. Her lips curled into a cruel sneer. "Look at you," she said, her voice dripping with venom. "You look absolutely pathetic, Natalie. I honestly cannot believe I raised someone so entirely devoid of class. Did you have to walk here from your cheap motel?" I kept my head lowered and pulled out a chair at the far end of the long table, creating as much physical distance between us as possible. "I did not take a cab," I lied softly, letting my voice waver just enough to sound thoroughly intimidated. "I walked. I have to save whatever money I have left." Terrence let out a loud, barking laugh. He swung his feet off the table and leaned forward, resting his elbows on the oak surface. "That is what happens when you try to mess with the big dogs," he taunted, pointing a finger at me. "You thought you could outsmart us. You thought you could report me to the cops and walk away clean. But I am always 5 steps ahead of you. You are going to sign this formal deposition today. You are going to take the fall for the missing pension money, and you are going to beg the judge for mercy. If you do exactly what I say, maybe I will convince your mother to throw you a few $100s so you do not starve on the streets." "Mr. Prescott?" Their attorney cleared his throat and shot Terrence a warning look. He clearly did not like his client openly gloating about coercion on the record, but he was getting paid too much to stop it. Mr. Prescott opened his leather portfolio and slid a pristine watermarked copy of the extortion contract across the table toward me. He signaled for the court reporter in the corner to begin the transcription. "Ms. Caldwell." Mr. Prescott began, his tone cold and entirely devoid of empathy. "We are here to formalize the settlement agreement you digitally signed last night. Before we present this to the judge in civil court, I need to verify for the sworn record that you are entering into this agreement willingly. You acknowledge that you have no legal representation present, you waive your right to counsel, and you accept full liability for the embezzled corporate funds. Is that understood?" I looked down at the contract resting in front of me. It was the exact same document Terrence had emailed me. The document that demanded I surrender all my inheritance and confess to a federal crime in exchange for them dropping the lawsuit. It was the ultimate piece of evidence for a federal extortion charge, and they were literally handing it to me on a silver platter, fully intending to swear to its validity on a court record. I looked up at Patricia. She was watching me with triumphant, predatory eyes. She genuinely believed she had backed a defenseless animal into a corner. She had absolutely no idea that she was staring at the sole trust protector of the Caldwell empire, a woman who possessed the legal authority to instantly render her penniless and homeless. I let out a small, manufactured sigh, picked up the black pen resting next to the document, and prepared to close the trap. "Yes," I whispered softly, making sure the court reporter caught every syllable. "I understand perfectly." I held the black pen over the thick parchment paper, letting the tip hover just millimeters above the signature line. The entire room was completely silent, waiting for me to finalize my own destruction. Terrence leaned forward in his chair, his eyes locked greedily on the pen. Patricia was practically vibrating with anticipation, but instead of signing, I let my hand tremble slightly, and I slowly placed the pen back down on the polished mahogany table. Mr. Prescott let out a sharp, irritated sigh. "Is there a problem, Ms. Caldwell? You just stated you understood the terms." "I do," I replied, keeping my voice small and fragile. "I am just so overwhelmed by the legal terminology. I have never been deposed before. Because I do not have a lawyer to explain this to me, I just want to ask a few simple clarifying questions, just for my own peace of mind before I sign away my entire life. Is that allowed?" Mr. Prescott frowned, glancing at my mother. Patricia rolled her eyes, her patience wearing incredibly thin. "Oh, for heaven's sake, Natalie," she snapped. "Stop stalling. It is a standard settlement agreement." "Actually," Mr. Prescott interrupted, adjusting his glasses, "as a pro se litigant, she does have the right to ask clarifying questions regarding the terms of the settlement on the record." "Keep it brief, Ms. Caldwell. We are on the clock." I nodded meekly and turned my attention toward the court reporter. Her fingers were poised over the stenography machine, ready to capture every word. I needed to ensure this transcript was flawless. I looked directly at my mother. "Patricia," I began, adopting a tone of genuine confusion. "This contract states that I am surrendering my shares and rights back to the sole executive authority of the company. I just want to make sure I am giving it to the right person. For the official record, can you confirm that you are the sole executive authority of the Caldwell firm? Do you share voting power with anyone else?" Patricia scoffed loudly, insulted that I would even question her absolute power. "Of course, I am the sole authority," she declared, her voice echoing off the glass walls. "I am the chief executive officer. I control every single asset, every bank account, and every real estate holding. There is no board of directors to answer to. I make every financial decision in this family and this company." "So you have complete legal and financial control," I reiterated, watching the court reporter type furiously. "No one else authorized the termination of my employment or the restructuring of the firm. I authorized it," Patricia stated proudly, lifting her chin. "I am the only one who dictates the direction of the Caldwell empire." I swallowed hard, suppressing the massive surge of adrenaline coursing through my veins. She had just sworn, under penalty of perjury, that she held complete financial liability for the company, completely oblivious to the fact that she was legally nothing more than a W-2 employee of the irrevocable trust. I turned my gaze to Terrence. He was still smirking, tapping his fingers against the table. "And Terrence," I said, shifting my posture to look thoroughly defeated, "the contract requires me to confess to embezzling $500,000 from the employee pension fund. But I am just a traditional accountant. I honestly do not even understand how that money was moved. You are the financial director of the new venture. For the record, can you explain how the capital was transferred? I just want to understand what I am taking the blame for." I threw the bait perfectly. I challenged his intelligence while simultaneously stroking his massive ego. Terrence could never resist an opportunity to brag about his self-proclaimed genius, especially in front of an audience. Terrence let out a loud, condescending laugh. He sat up straight, eager to demonstrate his superiority. "It is really not that complicated, Natalie, but I know traditional banking is all you understand. You did not move the money because you do not have the vision for it. I moved it." Mr. Prescott suddenly shifted uncomfortably in his chair, his legal instincts flaring up. "Terrence," he warned softly, "we do not need to detail the internal operations." Terrence waved him off, completely drunk on his own arrogance. "No, let her hear it. She needs to know why she is obsolete." He looked right at me, a cruel smile spreading across his face. "I initiated the wire transfers myself. I took the stagnant capital from the employee pension accounts and routed it through a series of shell companies I set up in Delaware. Then I deposited it directly into a high-yield decentralized token exchange. I authorized the transactions using your mother's master executive credentials, with her full permission, of course." I looked back at Patricia. "And you approve this strategy?" I asked innocently. Patricia smiled, completely enamored with her son-in-law. "I absolutely approved it. Terrence is elevating our family to the next tier of wealth. We had to bypass your department because we knew you would panic over the regulatory compliance. We made the executive decision to secure our financial future." Madison loudly popped her chewing gum, entirely uninterested in the mechanics of the fraud. "Can we please wrap this up?" she complained. "I have to call the bank manager again before the spa closes. My nails are a disaster." I sat there in the quiet conference room staring at them. As a forensic accountant, I spend months digging through digital trash to find a single breadcrumb of fraud. Terrence had just handed me the entire bakery. He explicitly outlined his money laundering sequence on a sworn legal transcript. He admitted to using shell companies to hide the movement of the money. Patricia had just sworn on the same record that she explicitly authorized the theft, bypassing the accounting department to evade regulatory compliance. They had just confessed to federal wire fraud, corporate embezzlement, and conspiracy, all while under oath in a formal legal deposition. Mr. Prescott seemed to suddenly realize the massive liability his clients had just exposed themselves to. He reached across the table and tapped the contract with his pen. "All right, that is enough clarification. Ms. Caldwell, you have your answers. Now sign the document so we can adjourn and proceed to the courthouse." I looked down at the contract one last time, the extortion document that tied this entire beautiful trap together. I picked up the black pen. My hand was no longer trembling. I signed my name with a smooth, decisive stroke, cementing their false sense of victory. I slid the paper back across the polished wood toward the attorney. "There," I said, my voice completely steady, "it is signed." Patricia snatched this document from the table, her eyes gleaming with malicious triumph. Finally, she hissed, "The dead weight is gone." Terrence stood up, adjusting his suit jacket, looking down at me like I was an insect he had just crushed under his expensive shoe. "See you in court, loser," he sneered. I slowly stood up from my chair and grabbed my battered briefcase. Inside rested the irrevocable trust and my copy of the extortion email. I looked at my mother, my sister, and the man who had stolen my life savings. They thought they were walking to the courthouse to watch a judge finalize my destruction. They had absolutely no idea they were walking directly into a federal slaughterhouse. "Yes," I replied, offering them a chilling, empty smile. "See you in court." My clients misspoke. I stopped in my tracks and turned slowly back around. I looked directly at the court reporter, a middle-aged woman who had been quietly doing her job. "You cannot strike sworn testimony from a finalized deposition, Mr. Prescott," I said, my voice projecting absolute authority. "I am a pro se litigant, and I do not consent to going off the record. The deposition remains open until I physically leave this room. Keep typing." The court reporter kept her hands firmly on her stenography machine, her fingers hovering over the keys. She was a neutral officer of the court, and she knew the rules of civil procedure better than anyone. She gave me a tiny, almost imperceptible nod, and continued to type every single word being spoken. Mr. Prescott turned pale. He looked at Terrence with wide, desperate eyes. "Terrence, you need to retract your statement right now. You cannot claim you moved those funds. Do you have any idea what you just admitted to?" But Terrence was entirely too arrogant to understand the danger. Driven by his massive ego and his desperate need to feel superior, he flatly refused to listen to his own expensive lawyer. He stood up, adjusted his stolen Rolex, and leaned directly toward the court reporter's microphone. "I am not retracting anything," Terrence declared loudly, ensuring his voice was captured perfectly on the recording. "Let it stay on the record. I want the judge to read exactly how I saved this company from bankruptcy. Natalie was running our accounts into the ground with her outdated, cowardly accounting methods. I stepped in because I am the financial visionary of this family. I took the initiative to move that $500,000 into the offshore crypto exchange because I understand modern wealth generation. I executed the wire transfers, I set up the shell companies, and I did it all to protect the family assets. It was a brilliant move, and I want the credit for it." Mr. Prescott physically buried his face in his hands. He was listening to his client deliver a perfectly articulated step-by-step confession to federal wire fraud and money laundering. "Patricia, please," Mr. Prescott begged, turning to my mother, "tell the record that you did not authorize this. Tell the record that you share executive power with a board of directors, or that you were coerced. We have to mitigate this liability immediately. Patricia took immense offense to her lawyer's suggestion. Her narcissistic pride simply would not allow her to admit she shared power with anyone, let alone pretend she made a mistake. She stood up, smoothing her pristine white power suit, and glared at Mr. Prescott. "I will do no such thing!" Patricia snapped, her voice shrill and indignant. I did not misspeak, and I certainly do not share my authority with a fictitious board of directors. I inherited this company from my Aunt Beatrice. I am the sole legal owner. The buck stops entirely with me. I have the absolute unchecked authority to move pension funds, fire employees, and restructure this firm however I see fit. I gave Terrence my master credentials because he is family, and I fully authorized every single transaction he made. Do not ever speak to me like I am some confused elderly woman again, Mr. Prescott. I am the chief executive officer. The court reporter captured every single syllable of her outburst. Patricia had just doubled down, swearing under penalty of perjury that she had sole legal authority over the company. She was completely oblivious to the irrevocable trust sitting inside my briefcase, which proved she was legally nothing more than a W-2 employee. By claiming she authorized the theft of the employee pension funds, she had just cemented her own criminal conspiracy charges. They had both just committed federal perjury, compounding their original crimes into a guaranteed prison sentence. Madison rolled her eyes loudly, snapping her chewing gum. "Are we done yet?" she whined, checking her reflection in her phone screen. "This is taking forever, and my esthetician is going to charge me a cancellation fee if I do not get my cards unblocked." "We are completely done," I said, offering them a cold, genuine smile. I turned to the court reporter. "Please expedite the rough ASCII draft of this transcript and email it directly to me within the hour. I will pay the rush fee." "Absolutely, Ms. Caldwell," the reporter replied smoothly. Mr. Prescott looked absolutely sick. He stared at the signed extortion contract resting on the table, realizing that the document was no longer a tool for victory, but a physical piece of evidence in a massive federal investigation. He looked at me, and for a brief second, I saw genuine fear in his eyes. He finally realized that I was never the helpless victim in this scenario. He realized I had orchestrated this entire deposition specifically to trap his clients in their own lies. Terrence walked around the large oak table and approached me as I reached for the door handle. He stood uncomfortably close, trying to use his height to intimidate me. "You can take your little transcript and cry to the judge tomorrow," he sneered softly. "But you signed the confession, Natalie. You signed away your inheritance. You have nothing left. We won. Now get out of our sight before I have security throw you out into the street." I did not back away from him. I looked up, meeting his arrogant gaze with absolute unblinking focus. "You are right about one thing, Terrence," I whispered quietly, ensuring only he could hear me. "Traditional accounting is dead. Welcome to forensic auditing." I pulled the heavy mahogany door open and stepped out into the quiet glass-walled hallway of the law firm. My heart was beating with a steady, powerful rhythm. The trap was perfectly executed, the evidence was legally sealed on the sworn record, and the extortion contract was signed. My family had just handed me the rope, and they had proudly tied the noose around their own necks. I walked confidently toward the elevators, leaving them behind to celebrate their imaginary victory. The civil court hearing was scheduled for tomorrow morning, but my war was going to end long before the judge even hit his gavel. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my cell phone. It was time to make the most important phone call of my entire life. I turned on my heel and began walking toward the heavy oak doors of the conference room. But before my hand even touched the polished brass handle, the absolute reality of the situation finally crashed down on Mr. Prescott. As a seasoned corporate defense attorney, his brain had just caught up to the catastrophic legal implications of what his clients had proudly confessed to. "Wait!" Mr. Prescott suddenly shouted, his voice cracking with uncharacteristic panic. He slammed his hands down on the mahogany table and turned frantically toward the court reporter. "Madam Court Reporter, we are going off the record. Please strike those last clarifications from the transcript." My clients misspoke. I stopped in my tracks and turned slowly back around. I looked directly at the court reporter, a middle-aged woman who had been quietly doing her job. You cannot strike sworn testimony from a finalized deposition, Mr. Prescott, I said, my voice projecting absolute authority. I am a pro se litigant, and I do not consent to going off the record. The deposition remains open until I physically leave this room. Keep typing. The court reporter kept her hands firmly on her stenography machine, her fingers hovering over the keys. She was a neutral officer of the court, and she knew the rules of civil procedure better than anyone. She gave me a tiny, almost imperceptible nod and continued to type every single word being spoken. Mr. Prescott turned pale. He looked at Terrence with wide, desperate eyes. Terrence, you need to retract your statement right now. You cannot claim you moved those funds. Do you have any idea what you just admitted to? But Terrence was entirely too arrogant to understand the danger. Driven by his massive ego and his desperate need to feel superior, he flatly refused to listen to his own expensive lawyer. He stood up, adjusted his stolen Rolex, and leaned directly toward the court reporter's microphone. I am not retracting anything, Terrence declared loudly, ensuring his voice was captured perfectly on the recording. Let it stay on the record. I want the judge to read exactly how I saved this company from bankruptcy. Natalie was running our accounts into the ground with her outdated, cowardly accounting methods. I stepped in because I am the financial visionary of this family. I took the initiative to move that $500,000 into the offshore crypto exchange because I understand modern wealth generation. I executed the wire transfers, I set up the shell companies, and I did it all to protect the family assets. It was a brilliant move, and I want the credit for it. Mr. Prescott physically buried his face in his hands. He was listening to his client deliver a perfectly articulated step-by-step confession to federal wire fraud and money laundering. Patricia, please, Mr. Prescott begged, turning to my mother. Tell the record that you did not authorize this. Tell the record that you share executive power with a board of directors, or that you were coerced. We have to mitigate this liability immediately. Patricia took immense offense to her lawyer's suggestion. Her narcissistic pride simply would not allow her to admit she shared power with anyone, let alone pretend she made a mistake. She stood up, smoothing her pristine white power suit, and glared at Mr. Prescott. I will do no such thing, Patricia snapped, her voice shrill and indignant. I did not misspeak, and I certainly do not share my authority with a fictitious board of directors. I inherited this company from my Aunt Beatrice. I am the sole legal owner. The buck stops entirely with me. I have the absolute unchecked authority to move pension funds, fire employees, and restructure this firm however I see fit. I gave Terrence my master credentials because he is family, and I fully authorized every single transaction he made. Do not ever speak to me like I am some confused elderly woman again, Mr. Prescott. I am the chief executive officer. The court reporter captured every single syllable of her outburst. Patricia had just doubled down, swearing under penalty of perjury that she had sole legal authority over the company. She was completely oblivious to the irrevocable trust sitting inside my briefcase, which proved she was legally nothing more than a W-2 employee. By claiming she authorized the theft of the employee pension funds, she had just cemented her own criminal conspiracy charges. They had both just committed federal perjury, compounding their original crimes into a guaranteed prison sentence. Madison rolled her eyes loudly, snapping her chewing gum. Are we done yet? She whined, checking her reflection in her phone screen. This is taking forever, and my esthetician is going to charge me a cancellation fee if I do not get my cards unblocked. We are completely done, I said, offering them a cold, genuine smile. I turned to the court reporter. Please expedite the rough ASCII draft of this transcript and email it directly to me within the hour. I will pay the rush fee. Absolutely, Ms. Caldwell, the reporter replied smoothly. Mr. Prescott looked absolutely sick. He stared at the signed extortion contract resting on the table, realizing that the document was no longer a tool for victory, but a physical piece of evidence in a massive federal investigation. He looked at me, and for a brief second, I saw genuine fear in his eyes. He finally realized that I was never the helpless victim in this scenario. He realized I had orchestrated this entire deposition specifically to trap his clients in their own lies. Terrence walked around the large oak table and approached me as I reached for the door handle. He stood uncomfortably close, trying to use his height to intimidate me. "You can take your little transcript and cry to the judge tomorrow," he sneered softly. "But you signed the confession, Natalie. You signed away your inheritance. You have nothing left. We won. Now get out of our sight before I have security throw you out into the street." I did not back away from him. I looked up, meeting his arrogant gaze with absolute, unblinking focus. "You are right about one thing, Terrence," I whispered quietly, ensuring only he could hear me. "Traditional accounting is dead. Welcome to forensic auditing." I pulled the heavy mahogany door open and stepped out into the quiet glass-walled hallway of the law firm. My heart was beating with a steady, powerful rhythm. The trap was perfectly executed. The evidence was legally sealed on the sworn record, and the extortion contract was signed. My family had just handed me the rope, and they had proudly tied the noose around their own necks. I walked confidently toward the elevators, leaving them behind to celebrate their imaginary victory. The civil court hearing was scheduled for tomorrow morning, but my war was going to end long before the judge even hit his gavel. I reached into my pocket and pulled out my cell phone. It was time to make the most important phone call of my entire life. I pressed the down button in the elevator lobby, watching the digital numbers slowly descend. The heavy oak doors of the conference room swung open behind me. Confident, heavy footsteps echoed across the polished marble floor. It was Terrence. He had followed me out of the boardroom, clearly unable to let me leave without asserting his dominance one last time. Without his expensive lawyer present to monitor his behavior, he stepped uncomfortably close to me. He leaned in his heavy cologne, overpowering the clean, filtered air of the corporate hallway. "You really thought you could play games with me?" he whispered, his voice dripping with classist disgust. "You are nothing but a broke loser, Natalie. You have always been a pathetic peasant playing dress-up in our world. You are going to spend the rest of your miserable life renting cheap apartments and eating canned soup while you pay off this settlement. While you are begging the judge for a payment plan tomorrow morning, Madison and I will be shopping for a summer home in the Hamptons. Do not ever forget your place again." I looked at his stolen Rolex shining under the recessed lighting. I looked at the smug, unearned satisfaction practically radiating from his pores. He was so deeply entrenched in his delusion of grandeur that he could not see the massive legal anvil hanging right above his head. I did not argue with him. I did not raise my voice or defend my pride. I just smiled. The brass elevator doors slid open with a soft chime. "Enjoy the Hamptons." "Terrence," I said smoothly, stepping inside the cab. The doors closed completely, cutting off his arrogant grin. I rode the elevator down to the ground floor and walked out into the crisp Chicago afternoon air. The black luxury town car I had hired earlier was waiting for me at the curb. I climbed into the spacious leather interior of the back seat, pulled my laptop from my battered briefcase, and locked the doors. The charade was officially over. I was no longer the frightened, penniless sister begging her family for mercy. I was the lead forensic auditor executing a lethal corporate takedown. I connected my computer to my encrypted mobile hotspot just as my phone buzzed with a new notification. It was an email from the court reporter containing the expedited rough ASCII draft of the deposition we had just concluded. I quickly scanned the document, highlighting the exact lines where Terrence explicitly boasted about moving the pension funds, and where Patricia swore under penalty of perjury that she fully authorized the theft. It was a flawless, legally binding confession. Now I had every single piece of the puzzle. I had the server logs, the offshore routing numbers, the forged signatures, the extortion contract, and the sworn perjury. I dragged all the files into a single master folder. It was a complete, irrefutable federal dossier that would completely dismantle their lives. I opened my encrypted communication portal and dialed a direct phone number I had memorized years ago. As a forensic accountant who specializes in uncovering massive corporate fraud, I do not call the local city police precinct when I find a discrepancy. I call the people who dismantle financial empires for a living. The line rang twice before a sharp professional voice answered. Agent Reynolds, he said. Special Agent David Reynolds was a senior investigator for the Internal Revenue Service Criminal Investigation Division. We had collaborated on 2 massive corporate embezzlement cases in the past, and he respected my meticulous attention to detail. The criminal division of the IRS has a conviction rate of nearly 90%, making them the absolute worst enemy a fraudster could ever attract. David, it is Natalie Caldwell. I said, my voice crisp and completely devoid of emotion. I have a massive package for you. It is a priority one-wire fraud and corporate embezzlement case involving a decentralized cryptocurrency exchange and money laundering. The stolen funds total exactly $500,000 diverted directly from a federally protected employee pension account. I heard him sit up straighter in his chair, the rustling of paper stopping immediately. $500,000 from an employee pension fund. David repeated, his tone shifting into absolute focus. Who is the target? I did not hesitate. Terrence Miller. And the acting chief executive officer of the Caldwell firm, Patricia Caldwell. They are currently out on state bail for a related charge, but the local authorities do not have the jurisdiction or the resources to trace the offshore crypto wallets. I do. And I just emailed you the complete forensic breakdown. I hit the execute command on my laptop, transmitting the heavily encrypted dossier directly to his federal secure server. Check your inbox, I said, watching the upload bar complete. You have the original corporate ledger, the blockchain trace, the Delaware Shell Company registrations, the forged wire transfers, and a sworn deposition transcript from 10 minutes ago where they both openly confessed to the entire theft under oath. I heard the rapid clicking of his keyboard as he opened the files and began to scan the evidence. A low, sharp whistle escaped his lips. Natalie, this is an absolute bloodbath, he muttered, clearly astonished by the sheer stupidity of the criminals. They literally admitted to federal wire fraud on the record, and they sent a predatory extortion contract through the mail to secure it. This is a slam dunk. I need federal warrants, David, I said coldly, looking out the tinted window of the town car as we drove through the financial district. The final civil hearing is tomorrow morning at 9 o'clock. They are going to walk into the federal courthouse expecting to use that extortion contract to secure a default judgment against me and clear their names. I want your federal agents waiting for them when they realize they have absolutely nothing. Consider it done, Agent Reynolds replied, the full weight of the federal machine revving to life behind his words. With this level of meticulously documented evidence, I can get a federal magistrate to sign the arrest warrants and asset seizure orders within the hour. The machine is moving, Natalie. They will not see it coming. I ended the call and closed my laptop. The trap was permanently sealed. The next morning arrived with a heavy, overcast sky, but inside the federal civil courthouse the fluorescent lights blazed with clinical precision. I walked through the heavy double doors of courtroom 4B, wearing the exact same cheap gray suit I had worn to the deposition. My battered leather briefcase hung heavily from my right hand. The gallery was mostly empty, save for a few law clerks and a handful of spectators. But at the front of the room, seated at the polished mahogany plaintiff table, my family had already assembled for what they believed would be their absolute victory. Patricia wore a tailored emerald green designer suit, her hair perfectly styled, projecting the image of a flawless, untouchable billionaire matriarch. Madison sat directly behind her in the gallery row, loudly chewing gum and furiously tapping on her phone screen, still clearly annoyed about her frozen credit cards. Terrence sat beside my mother, adjusting the cuffs of his expensive shirt. Despite the fact that he was wearing a court-mandated ankle monitor beneath his trousers, he still wore that identical, insufferable smirk. He genuinely believed that the extortion contract they forced me to sign yesterday had magically erased his federal crimes. Mr. Prescott, their high-priced corporate attorney, was busy organizing a stack of pristine legal documents, clearly preparing to present my forced confession to the judge and wrap the case up before lunch. As I walked down the center aisle toward the defense table, Patricia turned in her chair. Her eyes scanned my cheap suit and my solitary presence. She let out a sharp, cruel laugh that echoed through the quiet courtroom. Could not afford a lawyer. She mocked, her voice laced with absolute venom. You always were the pathetic one, Natalie. Just hand the judge the confession so we can go home. I do not want to breathe the same air as you any longer than necessary. Mr. Prescott smirked, adjusting his silk tie. Terence leaned back and gave me a condescending wink. I did not respond. I simply set my briefcase down on the solid oak table, clicked the brass latches open, and waited. All rise, the bailiff bellowed as the heavy door behind the bench swung open. Honorable Judge Davis took his seat. He was an older, stern-looking man with sharp eyes and an absolute zero-tolerance policy for courtroom theatrics. He adjusted his reading glasses and looked down at the case file. Caldwell versus Caldwell, he announced, his voice deep and resonant. I see the plaintiff, Patricia Caldwell, is represented by Mr. Prescott, and the defendant, Natalie Caldwell, is representing herself, pro se. That is correct, Your Honor, Mr. Prescott stated, standing up confidently. In fact, we can make this incredibly brief. We have reached a full settlement agreement with the defendant. Ms. Caldwell has signed a sworn deposition and a binding contract admitting full liability for the embezzled corporate funds and surrendering her equity rights. We respectfully request the court enter a summary judgment in our favor immediately based on this confession. Judge Davis looked over his glasses at me. Is this true, Ms. Caldwell? Are you submitting a signed confession and waiving your right to trial? I stood up, my posture perfectly straight. No, Your Honor, I replied, my voice ringing out clearly across the massive room. The document opposing counsel is referring to is a fraudulent contract obtained through documented federal extortion. I am not submitting a confession. I am submitting a motion to dismiss their lawsuit entirely with extreme prejudice. Furthermore, I am submitting the original governing documents of the Caldwell corporate entity, which prove that the plaintiff, Patricia Caldwell, has zero legal standing to file a lawsuit on behalf of this company. Patricia let out a loud, dramatic gasp of fake outrage. Your Honor, she is lying, she shouted. Judge Davis slammed his gavel down once. The sharp crack echoed like a gunshot. Silence, he commanded, glaring at my mother. You will not speak out of turn in my courtroom, Ms. Caldwell. He turned his sharp gaze back to me. Those are incredibly bold claims, young lady. Approach the bench and present your evidence. I picked up the thick leather folder containing Aunt Beatrice's masterpiece. I walked past Mr. Prescott, who was suddenly looking very rigid, and handed the original notarized documents to the bailiff. The bailiff passed them up to the judge. Your Honor, what you are looking at is the original unredacted irrevocable trust established by the late Beatrice Caldwell, I explained calmly, standing tall before the bench. As the documents clearly outline, Patricia Caldwell is not the owner of the Caldwell real estate empire. She has never held a single voting share. She is strictly an at-will W-2 employee who was given the honorary title of Chief Executive Officer. The entire company, its assets, and its bank accounts are wholly owned by the trust. Mr. Prescott jumped to his feet, his face flushing red. Objection, Your Honor. This is absurd. My client inherited the company years ago. Overruled. Judge Davis snapped, raising a hand to silence the lawyer. I am reading a perfectly notarized legal trust document, Mr. Prescott. I suggest you remain quiet while I review it. The courtroom fell completely dead silent. The only sound was the heavy parchment pages turning as Judge Davis read through the precise legal architecture my aunt had built. He read the employment clauses. He read the poison pill stipulations. And then he reached page 42, the trust protector clause. He read the paragraph twice, tracking the text with his index finger. He examined Aunt Beatrice's signature and the federal notary stamp, proving its absolute authenticity. He looked at the activation date directly tied to my 33rd birthday. The judge's eyes widened slightly, a rare break in his stoic judicial demeanor. He slowly took off his reading glasses and placed them on the bench. He looked at me, and then he shifted his piercing gaze directly to Mr. Prescott. Counsel, Judge Davis said, his voice dropping an octave, carrying a weight that completely shifted the gravity in the room. Did you review your client's corporate charter before filing this massive civil lawsuit? Mr. Prescott swallowed hard, his professional confidence instantly evaporating. I reviewed the documents provided to me by my client, Your Honor. She assured me she was the sole proprietor. Well, your client lied to you, Judge Davis stated flatly. He picked up the trust document and held it up for the entire room to see. The judge looked directly at Patricia's lawyer and delivered the absolute crushing reality. Your client does not own this company. The plaintiff, Natalie, does. Furthermore, your client has no legal standing in this courtroom whatsoever. She does not own the accounts she is suing over. She does not own the firm she is claiming to represent. By the exact letter of this irrevocable trust, she is merely a terminated employee. Mr. Prescott turned the color of wet ash. He looked at Patricia as if she were a radioactive bomb that had just detonated in his briefcase. Patricia stood up, her perfectly styled hair suddenly looking completely insignificant. Her knees visibly buckled, and she had to grab the edge of the mahogany table just to keep from collapsing onto the floor. She stared at me, her mouth opening and closing in sheer terror. "You!" she gasped, the air completely leaving her lungs. I did not flinch. I did not blink. I just watched her empire burn. Mr. Prescott did not waste a single second. The instinct for legal self-preservation kicked in immediately. He hurriedly shoved his immaculate legal pads and pens back into his expensive leather briefcase, his hands literally shaking. "Your Honor?" Mr. Prescott stammered, stepping away from Patricia, as if her very presence was a contagious disease. "In light of this new and authenticated evidence, I must formally request an immediate withdrawal as counsel for the plaintiff. I was materially misled by my client regarding the ownership structure of the Caldwell entity. I cannot in good conscience proceed with this lawsuit, nor can I attach my name or my firm to any claims made by Patricia Caldwell." Judge Davis gave a curt, understanding nod. "Motion to withdraw granted, Counselor. You are excused." Patricia reached out, grabbing Mr. Prescott by the sleeve of his suit jacket. "What are you doing?" she hissed, her voice a mix of fury and sheer panic. "You cannot leave me here. I am paying you $800 an hour." Mr. Prescott forcefully yanked his arm out of her grasp. "You are not paying me anything, Patricia," he fired back loud enough for the entire gallery to hear. "According to the document the judge is holding, you do not have a single penny to your name. Your corporate accounts are frozen and your personal assets belong to the trust. You are bankrupt. Do not ever contact my firm again." He turned on his heel and practically sprinted out of the courtroom, desperate to distance his legal license from her impending implosion. Patricia stood frozen at the mahogany table, completely abandoned. The manicured facade she had spent decades cultivating crumbled into absolute dust. She looked up at the judge, her eyes wide with desperation. "Your Honor, please," she begged, her voice trembling. "There must be some mistake. I am the chief executive officer. I am her mother. She cannot just take everything away from me." "She did not take anything away from you, Miss Caldwell," Judge Davis replied coldly, looking down at her with absolute judicial disdain. "You never owned it in the first place. Your Aunt Beatrice owned it, and she placed it in a trust. The trust that your daughter now legally controls. Furthermore, by initiating a fraudulent lawsuit and attempting to extort the trust protector, you have triggered the poison pill clause explicitly detailed on page 43 of this charter. Your employment is terminated effective immediately. You forfeit any severance, any retirement benefits, and any access to company properties. This includes the corporate penthouse you currently reside in. You have exactly 24 hours to vacate the premises before the marshals forcefully evict you." Patricia let out a hollow, agonizing gasp and sank back into her chair. The reality of her situation was absolute. She was unemployed, completely broke, and homeless. Madison, who had been listening from the gallery, suddenly shrieked. "Mom, what is he talking about?" Madison yelled, standing up and waving her arms. "What does he mean we are evicted? Where are we supposed to live? What about my credit cards? Are they gone forever?" Her voice was shrill, entirely focused on her own selfish inconvenience, rather than the utter devastation of her mother's life. Terrence, however, shifted his strategy. He realized the civil case was dead, but his massive ego convinced him he could still outsmart the system. He stood up, adjusting his suit jacket, projecting a fake aura of calm. "Relax," Madison Terrence said smoothly, trying to salvage his pride. "This is just a piece of paper. So what if Natalie controls the boring real estate firm? Let her have the old buildings. We still have the 500,000 I moved into the decentralized exchange. They cannot touch the crypto wallets. We have offshore liquidity. We will just pack our bags, head to Miami, and start fresh. I am the visionary, remember. I can build a new empire by tomorrow morning." He actually believed he was going to walk right out the front doors of the federal courthouse and hop on a plane with the stolen pension money. He took a confident step toward the center aisle, grabbing Madison's hand. "Let us go," Terrence commanded, glaring at me one last time. "Enjoy your empty buildings, Natalie." Before Terrence could take a second step, the heavy double doors at the back of the courtroom swung open with a violent, resounding crash. The noise startled everyone in the room. Even Judge Davis looked up in surprise. Striding through the doors with absolute terrifying purpose were 4 federal agents wearing dark suits and tactical vests, emblazoned with the letters FBI. Leading the formation was Special Agent David Reynolds from the Internal Revenue Service Criminal Investigation Division. He held a thick stack of warrants in his right hand, his expression carved from solid granite. Terrence froze, his arrogant smirk instantly melting off his face. His expensive shoes felt suddenly glued to the carpet. The federal agents marched quickly down the center aisle, bypassing the gallery entirely and surrounding the plaintiff table. Terrence Miller, Agent Reynolds, announced, his voice booming with unquestionable federal authority. "You are under arrest for conspiracy, wire fraud, money laundering, and the embezzlement of federally protected employee pension funds." What Terrence stammered, his voice cracking into a high-pitched squeak. "No, wait, there is a misunderstanding. I am a venture capitalist." Agent Reynolds did not entertain the lie. He grabbed Terrence by the shoulder, spun him around roughly, and kicked his legs apart. "Turn around and put your hands behind your back," Reynolds ordered. Terrence tried to pull away, panic completely taking over his body. "I did not steal it," he yelled, his eyes darting frantically toward my mother. "Patricia authorized it. She told me to do it. She is the chief executive officer." "Save it for the federal prosecutor," Agent Reynolds said coldly, snapping the heavy steel handcuffs around Terrence's wrists with a sharp metallic click. "We have your sworn deposition transcript from yesterday. You confessed to the entire scheme on the record. You also sent a predatory extortion contract across state lines. The decentralized offshore accounts you bragged about were frozen by international authorities 20 minutes ago. Your fake empire is completely gone." Madison erupted into sheer hysteria. She threw herself toward the federal agents, screaming at the top of her lungs. "You cannot arrest him!" Madison wailed, her face turning red and blotchy. "He is my husband. We are going to the Hamptons. Let him go right now." A second FBI agent stepped forward, holding his hand up to block Madison from interfering with the arrest. "Ma'am, step back immediately, or you will be charged with obstruction of a federal investigation," the agent warned sharply. Madison recoiled as if she had been physically struck. She collapsed into the front row of the gallery, sobbing hysterically into her hands, completely shattered by the loss of her luxurious fantasy. Patricia sat perfectly still at the plaintiff table, her face entirely devoid of color. She looked like a ghost. She watched as the agents began patting Terrence down, stripping him of his stolen Rolex and his cell phone. Agent Reynolds then turned his gaze toward my mother. "Patricia Caldwell." Agent Reynolds continued, pulling a second warrant from his folder. "You are not under arrest today, but consider yourself a primary target of an ongoing federal investigation. We have secured your banking records and your sworn testimony regarding your authorization of these fraudulent wire transfers. Do not attempt to leave the state of Illinois. Your passport has been federally flagged, and any attempt to flee will result in an immediate fugitive warrant." Patricia did not say a single word. She just stared blankly ahead, completely broken. The woman who had proudly handed me an eviction notice and a termination letter at a lavish country club party 3 weeks ago had been completely eradicated. She was stripped of her wealth, her status, and her power, facing the very real threat of joining her son-in-law in federal prison. Judge Davis, who had watched the entire federal takedown with quiet approval, picked up his wooden gavel. It appears the federal authorities have this matter completely under control, Judge Davis stated. The plaintiff's civil lawsuit is dismissed with extreme prejudice. Miss Caldwell, you are free to go. He slammed the gavel down, the sound ringing out as the absolute final nail in their coffin. The sharp crack of the wooden gavel echoed through the cavernous federal courtroom and settled into a heavy, permanent silence. It was the sound of an entire empire violently shifting hands. I stood at the defense table and methodically packed my battered leather briefcase for the last time. I placed the original irrevocable trust document safely inside, snapping the brass latches shut with a satisfying click. Across the aisle, the reality of the federal takedown was unfolding in real time. Special Agent Reynolds and his team physically escorted Terrence toward the heavy oak doors. Terrence was no longer smirking. He was hyperventilating, his expensive Italian leather shoes dragging against the carpet as the heavy steel handcuffs clinked against his wrists. Madison trailed frantically behind the agent's mascara running in dark, ugly streaks down her face, screaming about her ruined social life and her frozen credit cards, until a federal marshal physically blocked her from leaving the courtroom. And then there was Patricia. My mother remained frozen at the plaintiff table, staring blankly at the empty chair where her high-priced lawyer had been sitting just moments before. The emerald green designer suit that had projected such terrifying authority this morning now looked like a cheap Halloween costume. She was completely stripped of her armor. The bank accounts were frozen. The corporate penthouse was gone. Her flawless reputation at the country club was about to be obliterated the second the federal indictments hit the evening news. As I picked up my briefcase and turned to walk down the center aisle, Patricia finally moved. She scrambled out from behind the heavy mahogany table and stumbled into my path. Her hands were shaking violently. The cold, calculated matriarch who had publicly humiliated me at a lavish birthday party just 3 weeks ago was entirely gone. In her place stood a terrified, bankrupt woman facing the terrifying abyss of the real world. "Natalie, please," Patricia gasped, reaching out to grab the sleeve of my cheap gray blazer. Her voice was trembling, thick with manufactured tears. "You cannot do this. You cannot just leave me with nothing. I am your mother. We are family. Please, you have to help me." I stopped and looked down at her hand, clutching my jacket. I did not pull away, but I did not offer her a shred of comfort. I just stared at her, utilizing the exact same cold, analytical gaze I used to dissect fraudulent tax returns. Patricia misread my silence as hesitation. She doubled down on the emotional manipulation, desperately trying to salvage whatever leverage she thought she had left. "Blood is thicker than water, Natalie," she cried, tears finally spilling over her carefully applied makeup. "Terrence manipulated me. He tricked me into signing those wire transfers. I did not understand the crypto market. He just told me it would secure our future. You have to believe me. Please just give me my house back. Give me a position at the firm. I will do whatever you want. I will answer directly to you. Just do not throw your own mother out onto the street." It was a pathetic, desperate performance. But as a forensic accountant, I only deal in facts. And the facts were explicitly clear. She had not been tricked. She had proudly authorized the theft of innocent employees' retirement funds because she wanted to fund a luxurious fantasy. She had eagerly signed a predatory extortion contract to send me to federal prison just to protect her own ego. She did not care about family when she fired me, when she evicted me, or when she drained my life savings. She only cared about family now because it was the only currency she had left to spend. I slowly reached down and peeled her shaking fingers off my jacket one by one. I stepped back, creating a permanent physical and emotional boundary between us. "You did not seem to care about blood being thicker than water when you sent the police to my motel room," I said, my voice completely level and completely hollow. "You did not care about family when you tried to force me to take the fall for a federal felony. You made your choices, Patricia. You chose the golden child. You chose the fraudulent venture capitalist. You chose the illusion of wealth over your own daughter." Patricia opened her mouth to argue, her chest heaving, but I did not give her the space to speak. Aunt Beatrice left this empire to me because she knew exactly who you were. I continued, looking her dead in the eye. She knew you would eventually try to burn this family to the ground, and she made sure I was holding the fire extinguisher. So do not stand here and cry to me about loyalty. Family does not steal from family. And you are no longer family, you are just a terminated employee facing a federal subpoena. I did not wait for her response. I turned my back on her and walked straight down the center aisle. I pushed open the heavy wooden doors of the courtroom and stepped out into the bustling hallway, leaving her sobbing alone in the gallery. I walked past the security checkpoints, rode the elevator down to the lobby, and pushed through the revolving glass doors. The crisp, cold Chicago air hit my face, and for the first time in my entire life, I felt completely free. I stood at the bottom of the wide concrete steps of the federal courthouse and took a deep cleansing breath. The heavy burden of seeking my mother's approval was permanently lifted. I was free. A sleek, black Maybach town car glided smoothly to the curb and stopped directly in front of me. The driver, wearing a sharp suit, immediately stepped out and opened the rear door. "Good afternoon, Ms. Caldwell," he said respectfully. "Mr. Harrington from the bank sent me. He said you have a board meeting to prepare for." "Thank you." I smiled, sliding into the luxurious leather interior. I placed my briefcase on the seat next to me. I was no longer the scapegoat. I was no longer the underpaid, disrespected background character. I was the trust protector, the majority owner, and the newly minted chief executive officer of the Caldwell Empire. As the town car pulled away from the curb, merging seamlessly into the downtown traffic, I looked out the tinted window and watched the courthouse fade into the distance. I had lost a mother and a sister, but I had finally found my own worth. The empire Aunt Beatrice built was safe. The employees who relied on those pension funds were protected, and the toxic cycle of manipulation that had poisoned this family for decades was permanently broken. The road ahead would demand my absolute focus, but for the very first time I was the one holding the steering wheel. They tried to bury me, but they didn't realize I owned the shovel. Have you ever had to legally cut off toxic family members? Let me know in the comments below. No, in the